Maybe this weapon isn't as insane as I originally thought. Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Crypt13, and in today's video, I'm going to be doing a weapon analysis and comparison specifically for her signature weapon, the MISTSPLITTER Reforged. I'm going to compare this weapon to her other 5-star options, at least most of them, not all of them. I will not be including the Summit Shaper, as well as I will be comparing it to her popular 4-star options with higher refinements, the Blackcliff Longsword and the Battle Pass, the Black Sword. And so by doing these comparisons, hopefully you guys can get a better picture on how much actual damage you are losing if you aren't using the MISTSPLITTER Reforged, and also to help you weigh your options if you happen to have other 5-star swords. If I missed something or if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. And with that, let me just first explain to you guys how I am doing my calculations real quick so that you have a baseline for what I'm actually looking at. So all of my calculations are done using a level 80 Ayaka with level 8 talent scaling, as well as she's going to have plus 20 artifacts, and we are going to specifically be looking at just 2 types of builds, the 4-piece Blizzard set and not a 4-piece Blizzard set. So a 2-piece Blizzard and a 2-piece Gladiator or Shiminawa. In these calculations as well is a little bit of substats to kind of reflect people that are free to play or just have really bad luck with their artifacts. So for those of you guys who have much better builds, this will still give you a good baseline, but you are definitely guaranteed to do much more damage. When we are taking a look at the damage for the Blizzard set, keep in mind that I am using a crit damage circlet for everything because the 4-piece Blizzard set pretty much takes care of the crit rate for you. It just gives you insane amounts of crit rate, so you really shouldn't have to run the crit rate circlet. As for when we take a look at the 2-piece Blizzard and 2-piece Gladiator, I am running crit rate circlet on all of her weapons that don't have natural crit rate on them. So only the Black Sword and the Primordial Jade Cutter have crit rate, so those are the only weapons that is running crit damage circlet, and everything else runs crit rate. Because if you don't have enough crit rate, then your damage is not going to be too great because you're not hitting those crits. Alright, so now with all of the logistics out of the way, let's get into the math, charts, and calculations. So here we go, guys. Here are my tables and my charts, and yeah, there's a lot of numbers here, so in order to parse this a little bit easier, we convert them into graphs. If you really want to, you guys can pause and take a look at the tables yourselves, but I'm going to be analyzing the charts that we get from these tables. And these tables, they plot the MISTSPLITTER with 2 stacks and 3 stacks, as well as the 4-star weapons when they are at R5 and then also at R1. And I'm only paying attention to 0, 1, and 3 stacks because 0 and 1 stacks is where you're really going to be with the Blackcliff weapons in general. It's pretty hard to maintain 3. 1 and 2 usually. And then of course we have average damage with the Blizzard set because this set bonus gives us insane amount of crit rate, and the crit rate is kind of all over the place with this build. So we need to take a look at average damage as well just to get a little bit of a better understanding, but we'll still come to the same conclusions by looking just at crit damage. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So this plots just her burst damage, her E skill, and her normal and charge attacks when she has her passive buff applied that gives her 30% extra damage. So obviously this is not quite a practical rotation, but I think it's pretty close because in my experience playing Ayaka, she's very quick swappy. Usually what you do is you pop your E skill, you dash, you get in a charge attack or a full normal attack combo, and then you pop your burst, and then you dash again, and you do some normal combos while your burst is active, or you switch into your other characters and start doing damage with them. So she doesn't really rely too much on her normal and charge attacks unless you're in the overworld. Then it's more important because, you're just kind of playing with her. But in Spiral Abyss content, you are definitely swapping off of her a lot more quickly. So this should still give us an accurate representation on her damage, but I also broke it down by each part of her kit, so we'll get to that soon. So right off the bat here, you can see, just looking at straight crit damage, the R5 Blackcliff the R5 Blackcliff Longsword with 3 stacks does almost as much damage as a Mist Splitter with 3 stacks as well. But again, this is a 3-stack Blackcliff, which is pretty difficult to maintain. So when it comes to just pure crit damage numbers, nothing really competes with the Mist Splitter except for high refinement Blackcliff weapons because of that extra attack percent boost. What's really surprising here is that the Favonia, the 5-star Aquila Favonia, does really decent damage compared to Skyward Blade and Primordial Jade Cutter, which is really surprising to me. But I guess it kind of makes sense because it has high base attack and 20% attack percent bonus, but that physical damage on its secondary stat is pretty much useless for Ayaka. So that's why when we compare it to Primordial Jade Cutter and Skyward Blade, even though its actual crit damage numbers are higher, the utility you get from extra energy recharge from the Skyward Blade is going to be better because you can cast your burst more frequently, which in the long term is going to deal more damage. And then for the Primordial Jade, it has crit rate on it, so that means your average damage is going to be much better than the Aquila Favonia. Because right now, right, we're just looking at pure crit damage numbers. But anyway, with a 4-piece Blizzard set, your crit rate is going to be pretty insane anyway, so I don't think Primordial Jade Cutter is the way to go unless for some reason your crit rate is not that great with the 4-piece Blizzard set. Then you can consider going Primordial Jade to hit 100% crit rate potentially, but I think that even without it, you're going to hit around 80 to 70 to 90. So I really don't think it's necessary to go for a Jade Cutter. And then the R5 Blacksword, it's not really noteworthy. It's pretty bad. The only thing that's good about this is the healing, which is kind of okay for the overworld, as well as you get extra normal and charge attack damage, and you can see that it does a lot of damage here compared to some of the other weapons. Its normal and charge attacks are boosted by the passive effect of this weapon, and then we'll see that when I break it down by each part of her kit. So over here on the right is just the R1 versions of our 4-star weapons, and of course they do much worse. You can see that an R1 Blackcliff with 3 stacks no longer competes nicely with the Mist Splitter, although it is the best performing weapon in terms of just pure crit damage numbers. But again, when we look at average damage, that's probably going to be different. But also again, with the 4-piece Blizzard set, you're probably going to hit most of your crits anyway because your crit rate's going to be so high. Between an R1 Blacksword and an R5 Blacksword, you get 20% damage with R1 and 40% normal and charge attack damage at R5, and that barely makes any difference. You can kind of see here, it's like 3,000 damage if your rotation looks like this. It's really not that much at all. I would very strongly recommend against R5ing your Blacksword. And again, remember that even though the Blackcliff looks like it's doing pretty good here, it's only doing pretty good with 3 stacks, and 3 stacks is not a very viable way to play because it's super hard to maintain. And also, if you're on the fence with the Blackcliff R5 versus the Blackcliff at R1, remember that refinement for the Blackcliff weapon only matters when you have stacks. An R5 and an R1 Blackcliff with 0 stacks, they perform exactly the same. You can see that on the chart here. The damage is 72,487 and the damage here is also 72,487. This is because refinement only affects the attack percent on your stacks. As well as an R1 Blackcliff with 2 stacks is equivalent to an R5 Blackcliff with 1 stack. They both give you an extra 24% attack bonus. So really what the R5 Blackcliff does is it gives you a little bit quality of life because you need to kill less enemies in order to get that attack percent bonus. But if you can manage to maintain all 3 stacks, it is quite the powerhouse. And just because the Blackcliff weapons are doing better than the Primordial Jade Cutter and Skyward Blade in these grass doesn't necessarily mean that it's better. It just means that its actual crit damage numbers are higher than the Primordial Jade Cutter and Skyward Blade. Like I said before, the Skyward weapons have the extra benefit of having energy recharge so you can use your burst, and Jade Cutter has the advantage of having crit rate. So if your crit rate is not great, then Jade Cutter is really good. But at the same time, this just goes to show that the Blackcliff weapons are pretty good and they are totally free. Moving on down to the average damage comparisons, we can see that the Jade Cutter and Blacksword do much better because their substat or secondary stat is crit rate. But like I said a lot already before, the 4-piece Blizzard set is going to give you tons of crit rate already, so it should be sufficient enough that you really don't need to rely on average damage because you'll be hitting your crits most of the time, probably around 80 to 90%. But for people that aren't running 4-piece Blizzard, the Jade Cutter and Black Sword are going to be pretty good choices, but still not good enough to match the MISTSPLITTER's average damage. Now, to give you guys some confidence that a Jade Cutter and Black Sword would do better in a non-4-piece Blizzard set, here is a plot of 2-piece Blizzard with 2-piece Gladiator. And we can see here that the Primordial Jade Cutter and the R5 Blacksword do much better. This first graph over here is crit damage, and the second one is average damage. This is pretty important because without the 4-piece Blizzard set, your crit rate is going to be much worse. As well as the MISTSPLITTER and the Blackcliff weapons are now using crit rate instead of crit damage for their circlet. We can see here that in terms of pure crit damage numbers, the R5 Blacksword does a little bit better than an R5 Blackcliff with 1 stack. And the Primordial Jade Cutter here is doing just slightly worse than the MISTSPLITTER with 2 stacks, and then obviously with 3. But as expected, the Primordial Jade is the runner-up to the MISTSPLITTER. However, if we turn to average damage, things get a little bit better for the Primordial Jade Cutter. So over here we can see that the gap closes even better for the Primordial Jade Cutter. It actually does better than the MISTSPLITTER with 2 stacks. The R5 Blacksword does a little bit worse because the crit rate on this weapon is not as high as the Primordial Jade Cutter. It actually starts doing a little bit worse than the R5 Blackcliff with 1 stack. So in terms of average damage, Blackcliff is better than Blacksword, but they're pretty much on the same level as each other. You can't go wrong with either one. If you decide that you use your normal and charge attacks more often though, then the Black Sword is definitely the way to go because you get that extra damage bonus on it. Now let's move on to our non-stacked graphs, and you can see that I plot both crit damage and average damage. There's really not that much of a difference. I went ahead and did some percent difference calculations between the important comparisons, so the MISTSPLITTER and the Blackcliff, and then the MISTSPLITTER Jade Cutter and MISTSPLITTER and Black Sword. So let's go over that really quick. So in terms of just normal attack damage, MISTSPLITTER and R5 Blackcliff with 3 stacks, there is a 1% difference. This 33,404 and this 33,762. It's actually in favor of the R5 Blackcliff. The R5 Blackcliff does more damage when it comes to normal and charged attacks. But 1% is literally nothing in my opinion. If we look at her charged attacks and her E skill and her burst, all of their damage is really close to each other. But again, and I'm going to say this every single time, 3 stacks on the Blackcliff is very hard to maintain, so it's better if we look at it with just 1 stack. And if we do that, there's actually 18.31% difference in terms of normal attack damage, so that there is pretty significant. 1 stack on an R5 Blackcliff gives you an extra 24% attack. Compared to the MISTSPLITTER at 2 stacks, there's 13.4% damage difference on her normal attacks. But since none of these weapons boost specifically your E skill or your burst, this damage difference is going to be similar for every single part of her kit. If we were to compare to the Black Sword though, that would change since we get an extra damage bonus on our normal and charged attacks. And you can also see here that the bar is slightly in a different pattern for the Black Sword versus the other weapons. And remember again that average damage with the 4-piece Blizzard set is not really that important because you're going to be hitting your crits 80 to 90% of the time. But if you were curious anyway, this is the damage difference of the weapons with average damage. Jade Cutter is really close, only 6% and 1% depending on the number of stacks, and the Black Sword is about 9.28 and 4.3%. And then for the Blackcliff, we have 18% damage difference with 1 stack and 13% difference with 1 stack, because I'm not including enough crit rate substats in this build. So that's why this average damage looks a little bit weird. But at the end of the day, if you're running 4-piece Blizzard set, you want to go all in on crit damage, and you just want to pay attention to those crit damage numbers. But if for some reason your 4-piece Blizzard set has low crit rate, then this will help you out. Now, when we move over to the 2-piece Blizzard and 2-piece Gladiator build, our crit rate is pretty much the same on all of these builds because we have to swap in crit rate circlet for the Blackcliff and the MISTSPLITTER. And we we can see here that the Primordial Jade and the R5 Blacksword, their normal attack damage is very close to the MISTSPLITTER, so they're very good options here, as well as the R5 Blackcliff with 3 stacks, but again, 3 stacks, hard to maintain. In terms of actual percentage, the Jade Cutter does about 10.7% damage difference, and the Black Sword is 8.32% damage difference. This is because this is just normal attacks. But if we look at her burst and her E skill, the Primordial Jade does do slightly less damage, but it's on the same damage difference as her normal attacks because there's no extra boost. But with the Black Sword, the damage difference is going to be a little bit more because we're getting a boost on our normal and charged attacks. We can see that the Primordial Jade does about 11k damage and the R5 Blacksword does 10k damage. So the damage difference when it comes to skill damage on the Blacksword is going to be a bigger difference than the normal and charged attack damage. So depending on your playstyle, you might want to choose one over the other. If you are really using a lot of her normal and charged attacks in your gameplay, then yeah, Blacksword is a great choice, and it's also not as expensive as a 5-star. And well, this is actually R5 and not R1, so maybe that's not quite a good comparison. So it's that 40% versus 20%. So this is actually going to be a little bit lower if it's R1. And then moving over to average damage, Jade Cutter is now only a 1% damage difference in terms of normal attack damage. And this is also going to be very similar to all of the elemental skills and burst. The damage difference gap grows for the Black Sword because our crit rate is not as high as the Primordial Jade Cutter. Primordial Jade Cutter gives us about 44, and the Black Sword, I believe, only gives us about 27. Please correct me if I am wrong about that. This also means that the skills from the Black Sword is also going to be significantly weaker. Even at R5, it doesn't quite compete with the 5-star weapons. Now compared to the Blackcliff Longsword, however, the Black Sword is going to do more normal attack damage, and we can see that here with the blue bar. 19,000 versus 17,000 for a full normal attack combo. However, when it comes to skills, the Black Sword is slightly lacking. We can see that the E skill here is about 10,000, and for the R5 Blackcliff with the 1 stack, it's 11,000, which this is also equivalent to an R1 Blackcliff with 2 stacks. And then the slashing damage is also a little bit weaker. There's about 600 damage difference, but remember that her burst slashing damage ticks for so much damage, so this gap is actually much larger than it actually looks like here. So that means your decision comes down to which part of her kit you value more, her normal and charged attacks or her elemental burst. For me, I value her elemental burst a lot more because it's just got incredibly insane scaling, and with the proper team setup, you can use this skill really often. So my choice would be to go with a Blackcliff Longsword and try to maintain 1 to 2-ish stacks. So what is the conclusion for the MISTSPLITTER? If you are using a 4-piece Blizzard set, this weapon is absolutely insane. But if you're using any other kind of set, it is actually quite mediocre. The crit damage secondary stat for this weapon is a total godsend. So if you are running the 4-piece Blizzard set, I would totally recommend getting the MISTSPLITTER only if you can afford it. Don't go spending $100 on this weapon if you can't afford it, because the damage difference isn't that great. Her free-to-play option Blackcliff Longsword is still 100% viable. R1 Blackcliff with 1 or 2 stacks is between 20 to 25% damage difference respectively. That is quite sizable, but it's not something like 100 or 200%. The MISTSPLITTER isn't dealing double the amount of damage. So the Blackcliff Longsword is definitely her #1 choice when it comes to free-to-play 4-star options. Now if you happen to have another 5-star sword laying around, their damage numbers are going to be lower than the Blackcliff, but they will provide better utility. If you need the utility like energy recharge or crit rate, then you should definitely use them. This means the Skyward Blade or the Primordial Jade Cutter. The Aquila Favonia is decent, but the secondary stat is quite useless physical damage. However, even with that useless stat, it does comparable damage to a Blackcliff Longsword. So if you happen to already have it leveled up and don't have a Blackcliff Longsword already, then it's totally fine to just go with that. But this is a very niche case, and it's going to get out damaged if you have 2 or 3 stacks on the Blackcliff. If you are not running a 4-piece Blizzard set, I would not spend money on this weapon. Its damage is way too comparable to her other weapons. And don't get me wrong guys, it's good, it's better, but it's not enough. It's not worth dropping the $100 or so to get this for a marginal increase in damage. Alright, that's all that I have for you guys in this video. If you made it this far, thank you again so much for watching. And if you liked what you saw, leave a like, leave a comment, and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. And until next time guys, I will see you later.